Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
All right, ready for a deep dive. Today we're tackling the fall of the Soviet Union. You've sent in a ton on this articles, podcasts, historical analysis. I guess you're hooked on this like I am. And what's crazy is it wasn't just outside pressure, it was like collapsing from within.
It really is a puzzle, isn't it? We see the USSR as this giant force, but internally, it was struggling way before that wall came down in Berlin.
You're right. One podcast I came across even compared it to like a sand pile, where one tiny thing could make the whole thing crumble.
That's John Lewis Gaddis's work, Powerful Imagery. But to get it, we got to picture daily life for Soviets back then, Imagine shortages, constant frustration, feeling like your voice meant nothing. That pressure, it built up.
It's tough to square that with the unshakable superpower thing.
Exactly. They projected strength, certainty, but behind it all, cracks were showing. Think about it when a system promises a better life, fairness, but can't even provide basic stuff. That's when people start questioning everything.
And it went beyond their borders, right? Our sources show growing discontent in the satellite states, Poland, Hungary, East Germany, all wanting out. This wave of nationalism, like they had to break free.
You got it. And this is key. Historian E.P. Thompson said these movements weren't just sideshows, they were central to the USSR falling apart. See, when faith in the ideology fades, the whole system is vulnerable. Like a building where the mortar is crumbling, even a small shake can bring it down. These independence movements, those were the tremors.
So you've got this pressure cooker situation, then Gorbachev comes along, tries to reform with Perestroika and Glasnost opening the economy, more freedom of speech. But one podcast mentioned Perestroika kind of backfired too little, too late.
Yeah, Gorbachev was on a tightrope, that's for sure. Remember the sand pile? He inherits this thing about to collapse, then Glasnost, while well-intentioned. Well, it kind of throws gasoline on the fire.
How so?
Well, more freedom of speech. He accidentally unleashes decades of bottled-up criticism. Now people could voice their frustrations, doubts, and boy, did they.
Like opening a pressure cooker, all that steam had to go somewhere. So the USSR is already dealing with all this internal pressure. And then Gorbachev makes this almost unthinkable move. He announces the Sinatra Doctrine. Our sources say it was basically declaring every nation has the right to choose its own path. Imagine the shockwaves through the Eastern Bloc.
Radical shift, totally. To get how huge this was, we got to go back to the Brezhnev Doctrine. For decades, that basically meant the Soviet Union could step in militarily to keep their satellite states under communist control. And those satellite states, by the way, places like Poland, Hungary, independent on paper, but Moscow was really calling the shots.
Stuck in the Soviet orbit.
Exactly. Then Gorbachev comes along with his Sinatra Doctrine. They called it that because it was basically like, hey, you do you, make it my way. Talk about a 180. It was a huge change from decades of Soviet foreign policy.
Love the name. But seriously, what was he thinking? Calculated risk? Or just winging it as things fell apart?
It's tricky, but economics might be part of it. The Soviet Union was spread thin, managing its own problems, A&D propping up these other states. Gorbachev had to know they couldn't do that forever. Remember that sand pile? This was him admitting the instability, both inside A&D, outside their borders.
And then, it's like a chain reaction. Berlin Wall falls, the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, even Romania's dictator, Ceausescu, gets overthrown. It all happens so fast. 1 minute the Soviets are in control, the next.
Yeah.
It's like history on fast forward.
Amazing, right? Think about Hungary. You've got Prime Minister Nemeth openly pushing for multi-party elections. Radical idea back then. And Gorbachev, he supports it. Then there's Solidarity in Poland, this grassroots movement, fighting for workers' rights for years. Suddenly, they're a major force, negotiating for semi-free elections. These things weren't isolated. They were part of this wave washing over Eastern Europe.
It wasn't always peaceful, was it? We see the violence in Romania, how desperately some of those regimes clung to power. Really reminds you that freedom isn't just handed over.
You're right. The Soviet collapse wasn't some neat and tidy thing. It was messy. There was conflict. Lives were lost, tragically. But the fact that so many revolutions were bloodless, like that Velvet Revolution, it shows how deep that desire for self-determination ran.
It's like that John Lewis Gaddis quote. The people who dropped them were not in charge of superpowers or movements or religions. They were ordinary people with simple priorities.
Exactly. The Soviet Union's fall wasn't just politics or economics, it was about people, their hopes, frustrations, wanting a say in their own lives. And in the end, that's more powerful than any ideology or army.
So it wasn't just like Reagan and the whole arms race then, huh? It sounds like the Soviet Union was Well, on its last legs anyway, even without that.
You could say that. The Cold War mattered, sure, but that's not the whole story. The Soviet Union was already wrestling with ideological exhaustion, you could call it, a stalled economy, and this gap between what the Communist Party was saying and, well, how people were actually living.
That crumbling foundation we talked about, right?
Yeah.
It really makes you think about how powerful those internal things are, what people within a society actually need and want.
Absolutely. It's easy to focus on the big events, the global power struggles, but the Soviet Union falling apart, it reminds us that real stability, it comes from within. Listening to people, addressing their problems, making sure the system works for them, not the other way around.
Makes you think, for sure. This deep dive has been amazing. I've learned so much. Really appreciate you taking us through all this.
Happy to do it. It's a fascinating time, and I hope it gives your listeners something to think about.
I'm sure it will. And for everyone listening, this is just the start. There's a ton more out there to discover, firsthand accounts, different points of view, stories waiting to be told. So keep digging, keep those questions coming. Who knows what you'll find. Until next time, happy exploring.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.